Okay, so I think we can kick off our second meeting of Recodification Phase 2. I know we've got a lot to get to today on our agenda. So I just wanted to see if anyone had any questions about the materials. They got all of the materials. If we need to share screens, we can do that. I just want to make sure everybody had the chance to review everything that we sent out.
Yes.
Okay, very good. So with that short intro, Bob, I'll hand it over to you if you'd like to go through the items on the agenda.
Thanks, Jed. Good morning, everybody. Nice to be back.
Good morning.
Maybe someday we'll actually be in the same room at the same time together.
Yes.
But this is good for now. As Jed mentioned, we have put together a variety of information for you today. Excuse me. And one of the things, the first thing on the agenda that was listed that the work group asked for at the last meeting was for us to put together a sort of a starting point in some ways document to lay out what might be targeted in terms of the various topics that are on the Phase 2 list for upcoming town meetings, this fall town meeting, next spring, next fall. So we did put that together, which you have. There's obviously a number of caveats related to this. I think the biggest one we're all waiting for, of course, is the Attorney General's review of what got adopted in November, because that will determine a lot of what other topics we can either address or not address. So if the Attorney General comes back and says, hey, wonderful, everything's hunky-dory, then we can go on to the priority list. The Attorney General's come back and says, you know, there's 3 or 4 major things you really need to address, then that's going to, you know, be moved to the top of the priority list to get fixed for the fall. So that's one of the caveats. The second is, as often happens, you know, there were a lot of quote unquote top priorities identified in the Phase 2 list, and we're obviously not going to be able to do all of that for the fall. So we're going to have to, the work group's going to have to kind of whittle that down to see what you really want to aim for the fall. The third is there are a few corrections, not many, but a few corrections from what got adopted in the fall, with some language being omitted and one minor incorrect reference and a small numbering, incorrect numbering, which actually the town clerk could actually fix under his authority without having to go back to town meeting. With that, we, you know, Bob and I put together what we saw as potential sequencing of the topics between the priority topics between now and the fall of 2023. The only thing else I'll add is, as you know, the Phase 2 list has a lot of priority topics and then a lot of other topics. Some of those other topics are pretty minor and could be fixed fairly easily. So it's something we think that as we move forward over the next year or year and a half, we could actually fix some of those minor things, and you could add it to your town meeting amendment list without, you know, without much problem. So just it's just something to keep in mind as we move forward. So, but ultimately, you know, the major question facing all of us, and particularly the work group right now, is what do you really want to aim for fall 2022 town meeting?
The first question I would have to ask is there any indication when the AG is likely to give it the ruling as to whether what we did is okay or needs fixing?
Bob?
Well, that has to be within 60 days of the date originally designated, which I understand was March 1st. So we're working on roughly the next 2 weeks, sometime within the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
But I ask a related question? Bob, in your experience as a reviewer of these types of things, is there any likelihood the AG is going to come back with a long list of things that needs to be fixed? What's the likely reaction in your opinion?
Well, there's really no basis to answer that credibly. To what extent the Attorney General takes a microscopic look at every word and phrase of the bylaw. Whether they come up with things that are inconsistent with state law and disapprove it, I would think that there isn't that much likelihood that they would have a long list. Very often the Attorney General comes up with a list of things that they would caution the town about, not with respect to the way the bylaw is drafted on its face, but as to the manner in which the bylaw is applied. There's nothing inconsistent per se about the bylaw, but cautions about how to interpret it and live with it going forward so that you don't apply it in a manner that is inconsistent with state law. So I didn't really answer your question, but there's no way to know. A lot of the bylaw that was submitted is basically what it used to be. It was just brought over. So we suspect that there are areas of concern that will be the subject of phase 2. So I wouldn't be surprised that the Attorney General finds a few things in the residual text of the old bylaw that may run afoul of that measure of disapproval. But it's really hard to say. It's a big job for the Attorney General to read an entire bylaw. And I was hoping that they would get this out earlier than now, because they're being inundated by the Springtown meeting across the state. But I guess we just have to wait and see, Charlotte.
Thank you.
So Bob, with, sort of framing this conversation today, we've been talking, Michaela and I, about sort of tracking the errors and omissions on our side. I've actually gone through the bylaw a couple of times, and I have some more errors, some reference errors that that we found. And so we were thinking we would just keep a sort of a catalog or a library of all those items. And then, as you mentioned, basically split them into 2 categories. One is, simple errors that can be fixed by the town clerk, and then other more substantial issues that would have to go to town meeting. So we're happy to take on that responsibility of guarding that library. Guarding being a strong word.
Well, we have running access to that list, Jen.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, and so as the work group goes through, gets into more detail on various topics, you may find some errors as well, and so feeding them to Jed so we have an entire list, and then as we get into the summer, we can then look at the list and see, okay, what do we have to write up in terms of a proposed amendment to go to the planning board for the public hearing and to go to town meeting on the errors and omissions.
Could I interject here? Jed, you were going to find out for today from Frank or from our new attorney. We invited the people who are most closely following this, the people who bring things to the planning board. Last night it was Kevin Clower and Tom Bunker to join in so that they don't come in at the end and have to review the whole thing all over, but they have an opportunity ongoing, particularly on the things that the local work group is going to be working on. So I just wanted you to know that that had happened. And I wonder, Jed, if you had a chance to pursue an answer to that.
I did not have a chance to do that this morning. But my understanding is, in terms of this meeting space here, they would essentially not be a panelist because again, this is a webinar format. They would be in the audience, if you will. And so they would be allowed to type in through the chat any comments or questions they might have. We would address that either throughout the meeting or at the end of the meeting, any public comment that we receive.
Okay, I see that none has joined us for today, so it's not
That's
an
correct.
issue now. Yeah.
Alan, could I just interject something here based on your comment? Just, this is for everybody's to keep in mind as we go forward. When you ask people to review whatever it is you're asking them to review, it really needs to be very, very clear what specifically you're asking to review, i.e. what is being proposed to be changed. The situation that happened last year is too many of the people that were asked to review thought they were asked to review the entire bylaw, including all of the existing language, as opposed to just the changes that were going to fall town meeting. And that caused a lot of confusion among a lot of people. So I would just put out there to really think about how to pose questions to the public that you're asking them to review so they know exactly what they're being asked to review.
Right. I don't know that it would stop that. But
I-
it would be one more effort because we tried to be pretty explicit and they just broadened their purview.
You're right. It might not stop it, but to whatever effort we can make to try to frame the question.
Right.
Yeah, the only issues you might come up with in one of our meetings, we had, a local attorney give their comments also on the codification, is that you have to remember that they also represent entities that are looking for specific changes that may be in their favor for projects that they're planning. And just by nature of the business, that's their job. They have to represent people. And I know that, Charlotte and Pat, when we were on the, apartment bylaw, the apartment bylaw was the same situation. We had some comments that were coming in that were very specific to properties and changes that were suggested for specific projects. So I like the idea of people being able to comment because you do get, outside opinion and maybe something we don't think about, but you really walk a fine line when, it's people that are representing applicants. So you may want to come up with specific questions that, here's ideas that you have, what you might want to put in here, maybe a choice between one thing and another, and maybe asking their opinion on the choices versus just leaving it open-ended, where they can just chime in on all sorts of changes. Because once one person does that, the next person's going to want to, change their opinions for, their opposition or trying to get something through. It's very difficult when you have to do, these situations. Plus, you'd have to invite, you'd have to send out an overall, I would assume, to all the different people that chime in on the different boards that are before them a lot, so that it wouldn't appear that there were certain people that were taking part, and then other people chime in later on that said, well, I didn't realize this was going on, and I wanted to submit my opinion.
I'd like to
Caution.
suggest that when inputs are solicited, it should be clear that it's the bylaw text and not the policies of the town. A lot of people that respond in the minute that you just described, Robert, might be suggesting that the town's policies be changed. I don't think at this point we're soliciting policy inputs. We're looking at the text of the bylaw, right?
Yes.
You're right. I think those are good cautions and we will be careful, but I think that the suggestion that was in fact made by Bob Ament that they be included sooner rather than later was a good one. And we'll all be watchful for the situations that Bob's talking about. Everybody's named Bob, that Bob's talking about, Bob Duggan. But I think on the whole we'll benefit by having their participation. Last night when we discussed it, we thought we did need to come up with a list of people to be invited so we haven't excluded anyone by accident. So the planning office will be working on that, and then we'll see if they turn up. They didn't last time, and we all know who comes forward to us frequently, and that would be that frequent presenter list. So Bob Duggan, maybe you could help us with that, because and Noreen. 'Cause
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I guess my particular comment would be that we should not invite some people at the exclusion of others. So what I would recommend is just that the information be posted on the planning board's website. And if people are interested in participating, that's where they would go to find out about participation.
Yeah, I agree completely with Noreen. I think we want to be careful about handhold inviting certain people to make it seem as though they're more valuable residents or members of the public than everybody. I think we want to make it seem as though everybody is of equal importance.
Yep.
So just a caution.
Good points. Guess we're back to Bob Mitchell.
Well, okay. So can we go through the proposed timeline for town meetings and see what comments you may have on this proposal?
Yeah.
So we can, again, we would really like to, Bob and I would really like to start drafting or working on getting towards drafting after this meeting. So if we can come to some conclusions about what you would hope for at this moment in time for fall town meeting, that would be very helpful. So starting on page 2, priority list, we've already mentioned the errors and omissions. We'll tackle that. Let's see what the AG's office comes back with, and we'll go from there. Definitions was one of those ones that many people mentioned, and it got mentioned in all kinds of different ways. And I think Jed and Michaela accurately said, well, this is one of those ones that's probably going to fall over multiple town meetings. Because if you're working on, just for an example, if you're working on, later on we have the discussion paper about home occupations and home-based business. If you're working on that for this fall town meeting, then you're going to be working on the definitions for that for this fall town meeting. So I don't see doing a wholesale change to the definition section at this fall town meeting. I think it's going to be based on what topics you take up at each town meeting.
I think that's correct. It's the only way we can really do that.
Yeah, I would agree. That makes sense. And that way we can also target specific gaps that we're aware of, and that perhaps those can just be woven in.
Yeah, that's a great part of the definition section, Noreen. If there are gaps, we need to identify those and weave it into the fabric of fall town meeting warrant articles as we go along. So,
What would be the responsibility of each person on this Zoom to be identifying those gaps and letting you know as soon as possible, I would think.
I would agree. Do you think it makes sense if there are specific gaps, for example, that we're finding, that we're noticing, or with our use, for example, at the ZBA, that we come back with some type of proposed language for people to consider? Is that like the most efficient way to manage that?
Yes.
it would be very helpful.
Yeah.
It would have a starting point.
Okay.
Well, if you take home occupation and home-based businesses, and why do we have the separation of categories? Some of that may reside in not clear definitions too. So I think some of that could be sorted out by clarifying the definitions, or it may give us information as to whether we should combine the two in some way.
Yeah, I'm almost a fan of combining, in that some of that is hard to parse. I mean, initially when I looked at it, I thought, oh, if you're home-based, so you live at your home and you're perhaps a plumber, and so you're always out on the road. So your home is your office base, but you don't work there, as opposed to a home occupation where you might be perhaps an accountant and you have a spare room to do all your work from.
Right, combining is a good idea, but we're not getting into that right now. Now we're doing how we're going to deal with
Just
definitions.
priorities, yep.
Right. Yeah, so definitions, think about this as gaps, what's missing, what is, might need to be tweaked based on the conversation around a specific topic, like home occupation, home-based business, or definitions you have that somehow don't make sense or are hard to understand, or, you have questions about just generically, they're not tied to a priority topic, but they're a problem definition. So there's various categories of definitional changes that we would want to know about.
Hey, could I just sort of underscore something? In effect, we've now given ourselves homework. And during phase one, Bob and Bob left with homework after every meeting, but we didn't really. But now, because we really have a limited amount of money to get us through this, we're all going to have to do more homework. So our homework really for our next meeting is this definition section, so that we have given to Bob and Bob the gaps that we can see. We might find others later, but we're going to look for them on purpose now. And as Noreen brought forward, we're going to try, give a trial definition of our own, sort of like a starter definition when we bring back that gap information. So at our next meeting, everybody's going to have ID gaps, I hope, and therefore save Falmouth money.
Yeah, and I think, sort of piggybacking on that, if there's something specific that a person is aware of, like I have a couple of targets of my own, that could be something where we can share the information such that I would offer to work on a definition for, one particular item, for example, so that we're not duplicating efforts.
Good idea. But for the next meeting, unless we have some pre-meeting arrangements, we may be duplicative. I sort of doubt it because we have different interests, but that's a possibility.
And I would offer perhaps, just like the errors and omissions master document, that the planning staff can also manage the definitions master document.
Okay, so we'll send them to you ahead of time.
Yeah,
Exactly.
right.
Great.
Okay, now, but this is where I would have a question, because we come up with these gaps. Is it going to be valuable for the working group to meet and go over this personally, instead of everybody throwing darts at maybe the same thing, but to work it out?
So maybe it would be helpful to have one person propose language or amended language, and then we would all meet on that amended language and talk about whether it works?
On that, because of the nature of definitions, that's going to throw us off kilter rather steadily. I'd rather see a process where, okay, we're all going to be looking for the gaps. We're going to feed the gaps as we find them to Jed, and I would assume Michaela, whose project specifically this is, and they're going to be watching for the overlaps. And if they see a need for pre-work, they'll let us know.
You got it. Consider us your dartboard.
Right.
Okay.
So unless we don't want to get into the weeds on definitions now, we want to move through this priority list. Frank recommended municipal uses.
Right, and so this is one of those that there's a lot of issues around it, and I think it would, and I think it would be helpful to have a little discussion paper put together, the framework, that frame the questions and issues, because there's so many different ways the town could go. Towns treat municipal uses in all kinds of different ways, from very restrictive to very non-restrictive, and as you know, your current bylaw is consistent in many ways as to how it treats municipal uses and inconsistent in other many ways. So before you get into any deep discussion about that, I think that it might be helpful to have a framework discussion paper.
Who would generate that?
Me.
Ah,
Okay.
okay.
So Bob, on your outline, you have that in fall 2020 for town meeting. Is that an appropriate timeline for that type of thing?
Well, it's fall 2022 to annual 2023. Because that depends on, again, how much can we get? Let me back up. I meant to say this earlier. Fall 2022 town meeting. I don't know when the date is of that is, but this past year, the planning board started holding its public hearings at the end of August.
No, it's November 14th.
So you need to work back, and when the planning board starts holding its public hearing, end of August, beginning of September, or something like that, we're mid-April. So really, there's only 4 months left to draft language for the public hearing. So keep that in mind in terms of how much we can get done for fall town meeting. How much?
Can I ask, sorry to interrupt, can I ask a general question, which is when we're talking about specifically municipal uses, why would you go to clarify within each different zoning district what you could or couldn't do? Because presumably if it's a municipal use, the town is carefully looking at the location for whatever it is and whether that's consistent for the town.
Well, that's a good question, Noreen, but that's part of the policy questions that towns address in figuring out how they want to deal with municipal uses. Some towns have have taken the position that while the town does a very thorough review and analysis before they decide to build a library or a school or whatever, and the zoning shouldn't really come into play, and other towns go in the complete opposite direction, say, well, that's fine, the school committee decided to put a school here, but really the neighbors need to be able to respond to that, and it's the way they can do that through zoning. So, and then, is it okay to put a school in an industrial zone? Some towns say, sure, fine. Other towns say, no way. So those are kinds of some of the questions that, maybe the town and maybe the work group can come up with a quick, easy answer. Let's just allow municipal uses everywhere by right.
That would be what I would recommend, because
If you do that, then the end of discussion until you get to the planning board public hearing.
Okay, but once again, we're getting into the topic rather than setting priorities.
Yeah.
Because I think we were leaving municipal with, in Bob Mitchell's hands. He's going to frame it up. And until he does, we won't be coming back to it.
Great. The home occupation, home-based businesses, we're going to get into in more detail. That the first discussion paper is on that topic. So we're going to talk about it a little bit later.
Yep.
So yeah, that I listed as fall 2022 because I thought that would be, that was one of the major ones so many people talked about. And I thought, well, if we could tackle that, that would be a big change, a big fix for the bylaw.
Right.
And, and then if it's okay to move forward after today's meeting, Bob and I can start working on that, for the right, in April rather than waiting to, later on. So anyway, site plan review, again, this one, a whole lot of different issues. Just in my mind, I thought that this might be one that would probably not be ready until annual 23. Given what some of the other ones I have listed for fall 2022 is, but that's, that's just how I envisioned it, if you will.
Mhm.
Oh, I'm willing to go with your judgment.
Dimensional standards. Now, this one, the work group talked about this at the last meeting. We added some more information on the phase 2 priority list. We tweaked that list a little bit. And again, this is another one that's all over the place. It's sort of like definitions. It may be that we can tackle some of the dimensional standards at one town meeting and some more at another town meeting, because there were so many different issues raised, and some may be more important. I know Noreen and Jerry at the last meeting, and I know Pat in her list had, well, what's included in side yards and front yard setbacks, and what, how is it measured? How are setbacks measured from what to what? And there was some issues about building heights, and so, and then a whole lot of other issues. So maybe there's some way to tackle a few of those for this fall.
Wouldn't this be one where your framing of it by making a matrix of all of them, and we'll see the inconsistencies much more easily because they're all brought together and close, close to one another, and you can see where there are too many of them or not enough of them, and the inconsistencies and gaps are going to show up a lot better.
Yes, absolutely.
And certainly I'm glad to send you, the information on the problems that we're having and maybe some proposed language for solutions, if that sort of helps bridge.
Absolutely, Noreen.
And if you're going to be looking at something where you might be able to tweak them in the fall, then Noreen, when you list those, just, I mean, there's a few of them that you know about that are a definite priority, that if we could get them done this fall.
Yeah,
That's helpful in general. There are other ones that we could wait if we had to, but.
Yeah, absolutely.
So ag regs, we have Mr. Expert in ag regs right with us, Mr. Ritchie. He's already started to frame that out. He's working on that. And Bob, you want to update us on what your thinking is here?
Not really. I did have a brief conversation with the Attorney General staff on this and alerted them to the fact that we have as our goal a comprehensive review of all of the provisions of the bylaw dealing with agriculture. And there was a close symbiotic relationship between that and the earth moving regulation. Because, all agriculture moves the earth to some degree. And to some extent, earth removal regulation may have a wider applicability to non-agricultural enterprises than farms, which may, in some instances, allow farms to do things that non-farms cannot do. So I've alerted the AG to the fact that this will be one of our first areas of attention, and asked them to think along with me those sections. And I pulled them out from the bylaw and put them in a single page so that the AG could focus on them rather than to have to hunt throughout the bylaw to find them. So I'm hopeful that will be, make our attack on this topic a little bit more efficient.
So those two right now are on the fall 2022 list.
It sounds like that's where they belong because Bob Ritchie's going to do all the work.
That's
Can I
right.
tell my wife that?
Please.
Accessory apartments. So this is on the errors and omission list. You have that document that we put together. So going to fall town meeting, this is a decision for the work group as to how you want to present that to town meeting to fix the omissions. Document I put together, I just did it in track changes to show what needed to be added in and what needed to be deleted. So you got back to what the accurate apartment, accessory apartment language was that town meeting ended up where town meeting ended up, because town meeting amended that a few times over some period of time. And so going to fall town meeting, I'm not sure how you do this. You can do either, to see if the town will vote to amend, article such and such on accessory apartments to add the language shown in, I don't know, do bold or italics or whatever, and delete the language shown in strikeout. Again, I don't know how you phrase those words. And show what I'm showing you in the document today. Or I suppose you could also do it, just say, delete the existing language on accessory apartments and add this language back, and then say to town meeting, this is the accurate language from the bylaw previously. There were some errors left out, and so we're just replacing the language with errors with the language that was correct before the recode. So it's up to you how you want to approach it. But I think we need to get it back to where it belongs in terms of accurate language. And then, so that's, and then whatever else you want to do to accessory apartments can be at a future town meeting.
I agree with you, Bob, because handing something like this document that you put together to town meeting saying, ooh, we really messed up, but that's not going to be a good thing. The other thing, though, that it's under tables. And I think of a table as not something as descriptive of this. It's almost like this is an independent, or should be an independent section. But I don't know how to wrestle with it.
We can do it the way Bob Mitchell just recommended. It's in tables now, because that's what we took to town meeting. So we take back to town meeting, now it's accurate. We leave it in a table. And if for a subsequent town meeting, we want to get it out of a table, we deal with that at that time. You don't try to do two things at once when there's
Yeah,
this
I
much
don't
text.
know,
Yeah, that would be my take on it.
because this is all text. And I think of a table as having various columns that can be filled in.
Well, that's because it's in your table of uses. Because it was included in the list of uses in the old bylaw. And because the table of uses in the new bylaw was structured based on your recommendations to include all the standards, and because Falmouth has 1 million standards for accessory apartments, so you get a long text. So that might raise what you said, Pat. Should it be moved someplace else or not? That's a policy decision, not for us to make.
But I do think, though, that we need to get it back to what it was and not present something to town meeting like, oh, we've got to add all of this in and take all of that out.
So you think that removing it from the use table, putting it into, say, Article 9, which is the special use regulations, and then having all new language that reflects what was there before would be too much? Would that be too complicated for town meeting?
Are you asking me or Bob?
I guess I'm asking the group.
Okay. I think town meeting would deal with that a lot better than they would with what we've got here in the table with the strikeouts and the additions. And saying that by putting it in a table, it made it more complex for use than we had intended, because it is a special use.
Well, I'm picturing standing before a town meeting and asking them to do something.
Mhm.
I think it would be an easier ask to say, we presented accessory dwelling units in 2 zoning districts. We wanted it to be identical information in both. Turned out it wasn't. That was a mistake. But they're in tables of uses and we're leaving them there, but we're making sure that they're identical in both places and that they're accurate to what town meeting has passed, both the first time around and the tweaks made subsequently. So this is accurate language, same in 2 places. That's an easy thing to say. To say, okay, we're gonna make it accurate, we're gonna move it, it's gonna look different, it's in another place. That's harder.
Fair.
It's not impossible. It's just harder to follow.
So are the underlined sections that you have in here, are these just the new changes you're suggesting to make them equal to the tables, or are these just new changes? And the only reason I ask is because I don't, we probably aren't going to get into this much today, but I've got questions on almost everything on this section.
So,
on
Rob,
Word.
You might get there.
yeah, Rob, what you see underlined.
Yeah.
And if you had printed it in color, it would be in red because it's basically
Yep.
just changes.
Yeah, but I
What's
did.
underlined is the language that needed to be put back in to make it accurate. And what is striked out is language that was previously removed by town meeting. So
Okay.
we need to remove it again to get it back to its accurate condition. I discovered when I went back and looked at this, I had endless numbers of emails from various previous planners about what was the accurate apartment accessory language over many months and even years. And it was really confusing trying to figure out what, and I realized when I looked at this, that the last version I thought was accurate, what turned out not to be, and that's what led to these omissions. So some of the language needs to be added back in to be accurate, and some of the language that's in needs to be taken out for it to be accurate.
So it sounds like fall town meeting is correct, the language. Spring town meeting might be remove it from the use table and put it somewhere else.
Yes. And we might get to that today. Look at what they've given us.
Okay, so planned residential development, I think that one's really probably most likely to be a fall 2023. Again, just thinking about the timeline, if fall town meeting this year is November, when is the warrant closed for annual town meeting 2023? It's only going to be a couple of months, right?
Closes the end of
There-
January, early in January,
So there you go. That's barely 2 months.
right.
And it's over the holidays too, Bob, and that
And you got
always
the
creates a
holidays.
problem.
So Springtown 2023 may be more minor issues or sequential issues, maybe some more definitions, maybe some more dimensional standards, moving accessory apartments, those kinds of things. With only 2 months available, that's an issue. Anyway, so so some of these now we're kind of getting into the fall 2023 planned residential development, landscaping, parking and loading. And then the last three are, I listed as sort of fall 2023, annual 2024, the coastal pond, the floodplain, and the transfer of development rights. Those were my judgments. I welcome, and again, the more we, go over the next year, some of this can obviously move and change and whatnot. But right now, those are my best judgments.
The only one or two that I would question on that are the ones dealing with the coastal pond and the coastal floodplain. And the reason I question them, and just something to think about, the town created a coastal resiliency workforce. They've made a report. The report recommends that we drop whatever we have that is not in accord with the state requirements, and that we adopt their requirements just so that we're consistent all over the southeast coast of Massachusetts, which makes sense. And I don't happen to know what those requirements are. So I don't know whether that's something we needed sooner than 2024 or not. Does anybody know?
I don't know, so I don't know what state requirements are. Is that something the town's supposed to adapt as a general bylaw, or is that a zoning issue?
I do not know, but it's
Yeah.
among the recommendations of that committee. And they had other recommendations dealing with zoning. So I suspect that the planning board is going to have to seek volunteers among its membership of the planning board to start looking at the recommendations of the Coastal Resiliency Committee. And so there'll be this separate little work group going on that and coming back, and it might impact this. I don't know what the impact would be.
Well, remember also, Charlotte, the town meeting voted a sustainability position
Right.
without funding, so there's got to be funding. And that particular person would have charge of the coastal resiliency
So
as well.
possibly,
So,
I wonder if possibly that group could help assist with proper language.
Well, the Coastal Resiliency Committee has been disbanded. They
Yeah.
finished their work, they gave their report. I have no idea what their members would think about being asked to do more work. I don't know.
But I think going back to your original question, Charlotte, I think this is what needs to be answered first. What language is the state recommended, and is that zoning? If it's not zoning, then the answer to coastal pond may be just to remove this district.
Okay, so this needs exploration.
I think
Yeah.
some staff, planning staff, engineering staff, conservation staff, somebody in town hall needs to do some research to figure out what the recommendation of the Coastal Resilient Committee actually means related to the regulatory framework the town's supposed to be responding to.
mhm.
So Jed or Michaela, do you want to chime in here?
I was just going to say, I think that sounds like the planning department is going to need to do some research.
I think
There
you
we go.
could probably connect with Board of Health too, because I know we
Mhm.
typically get recommendations from them for properties that are in coastal pond overlay, for example. So it may be helpful to seek some information from them.
Yeah, I was gonna make the same comment, Noreen. The health department always chimes in on us on coastal pond overlays, and it has certain regulations they deal with, especially with septic. So my guess would be, depending on what that resiliency report was, that it may not just be deleting the coastal pond district, they might be just expanding or renaming it something, but
Mhm.
I would be very surprised if they could just remove it altogether.
It's more likely they would put the whole town in it.
Yeah,
We're just kind of sort of in already.
Right, most of it is already, so, but it's knowing what that means.
Mhm.
But anyway, that was just a caution as far as the expectation on dates. There's going to have to be separate but intertwined work in those areas.
Okay, well, that's why we do this, so we find out things we didn't know.
Yeah. Okay, so we have our priorities.
Yeah, so I will put together what I believe to be the fall 2022 agenda list for and give it to Jed and Michaela, the double and Bob, double and triple check, and then that's what we'll work from going forward.
Great.
So the reference in there to the floodplain overlay district. I know you said it was outdated. Is that why they're looking at that? Because actually you're either in floodplain or you're not, and that's federal. Is that why you're commenting that that may be outdated, not needed anymore? Because you go by the federal maps. So you're either in a V zone, an AE zone, or outside of it in general. It seems kind of unusual that we have actually a floodplain district.
Right, this is a really old part of your second, of the zoning bylaw, Rob. And like
Yeah.
many others, including the coastal pond and some others, they were adopted before the federal, the state, and even the town adopted other superseding regulations on that topic.
That's probably what that could be deleted.
Okay, so are we moving on now to review the errors and omissions table that is almost entirely about the accessory dwelling units?
I think before we move on, Bob, we had flagged restaurants as part of a priority list. I don't know if that is still in play.
Oh.
Did that make it onto this list?
I didn't
No.
see it.
Speaking of errors and omissions. Right,
Right, and that's a mess.
yeah, sorry about that.
I suspect because of its complexity, that also might be a fall 2023.
Yeah.
I suspect you're right.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, I'll add that back on.
the other one was subdivision phasing. That was the only other thing I saw that wasn't there.
Okay,
I'm happy, as well as Michaela, we talked about it beforehand, to take a close look at that. It's a short section to figure out, if it's still applicable, and sort of give it a once over and report back to the group if you'd like.
and that's one of the ones that it just struck me that raised red flags with Bob and I about potential legal issues. Because it was adopted a long time ago, and there's been court cases since it was adopted related to subdivision phasing and what towns can and can't do. So we'll have to, consider that the court history here. Okay, I will update the list. So then the errors and omissions. Well, the accessory apartments, we talked about a little bit, and then a couple of minor numbering, one reference error, and then one minor numbering error. That's all I had. But Jed and Michaela, I think, are starting their list of things they're finding as well. So.
When you've got something like changing it from a reference of a section, a lot of that looks like it could be called a typo. We're just correcting it because of either wasn't caught or there was a typo that put it in wrong. Is that something that has to go back to town meeting? I'm talking about your number 1 under errors.
Essentially like Scrivener errors.
Yeah.
I would defer to Frank and Bob in terms of how they might think about approaching that.
Because it seems to be kind of like that's a no question sort of thing. And that's why I'm wondering, does this sort of little bitty thing have to go back to town meeting? It's obviously not just a comma or a misspelling.
Well, a comma can be substantive.
Yeah.
And the question is, the litmus test is, does this in some substantive way alter what the town bylaw does. If the answer is affirmative, yes, it's substantive and it needs to go back to town meeting, needs to be approved by the Attorney General. If it's
Okay.
purely ministerial with no ripple consequences of a substantive nature, fixing an obvious error in the formatting, using a Roman numeral instead of a 1 or something, or writing SEC instead of the section mark, those trivialities should be addressable without going back to town meeting.
Who decides that?
The town needs to decide it, and of course, the overcall is by the Attorney General, who may or may not agree with you. It's always best
Earlier
to
you
be
said the town
conservative.
clerk, or would it be Jed and Michaela?
Well, it would be the staff, but also maybe just the planning board vote rather than going all the way back to town meeting. This question has come up not just with respect to the zoning bylaw, but we wrestled with this on the charter review committee.
Mhm.
And to the extent that we could, we want the town clerk to take care of this without going to town meeting or the voters if we don't have to. And I agree with Bob that if it changes the substance of what's said, yes, you have to do that. If it's just clearly ministerial, then let's not bother with it.
So,
For example, if you had a definition of a term that appeared in one section of the bylaw, and let's say you moved that to the definitions section of the bylaw, increasing the scope of its application to the entire bylaw rather than the one section where it had previously applied, that would be substantive because it broadens the scope of application of the term defined. And so there's no one type of change that we could say is non-substantive. You have to take each one ad hoc.
Okay.
And it will be
Well-
this working group that does that.
Yes,
Okay,
we have to trust ourselves.
that's a good way to proceed. Last night, we were told that something that I didn't understand that deals with height, the abbreviations that deal with height of the water. Pat and Jed, you were both there. It was JVD or
No, it's NGVD and NAVD. And the
there's an error
NAVD
in that.
is the current reference. And if you use the current reference, it puts the water level, what was it,
Lower.
9/10 of a foot lower.
Right.
So it is rather substantive when you're talking about flood zone. And I believe in our bylaw, it refers to NGVD. And that was brought up by one of the attorneys last night, well, the attorney who was there last night, that's
But I
one of the
couldn't find it
changes
in the
that should be.
bylaw. Where is it?
It
There
had
is
to
a,
do,
pa- right, there is a page for the elevations for the
Mhm.
different ponds. But I would also suggest that you have your town engineering review and proof that, because that's their bread and butter.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we've already flagged that as an error or / omission or correction, whatever you have. And so that will be part of that master document that I'm assuming we'll bring back to this group and say, okay, we all need to decide, is this in Bob's, words, substantive versus non-substantive. So we can just, work through that as the group proceeds.
Okay.
Well, didn't the town meeting vote FEMA? That they accepted the FEMA mapping definitions. And so if they voted that and the language in there is NAVD, they de facto voted NAVD as a term. I'm just throwing that out as something that we'd have to consider. So it may have already been accepted by town meeting without their realizing. And then it would simply be correcting it in the text.
We'll look for that.
Okay, and the other, the only other thing that I want to bring up now deals with an addition to 240-12E to add, which are the things to look for, standards, criteria, to add solar sighting as a decision factor. That would be page 117 of the new bylaw. But I think it was the planning board that decided that that should be added. It's never been to town meeting to add it. So I would think that would go this fall because, you know, we've already discussed it and voted on it. It just needs to go to town meeting.
So that sounds like an easy fix, but the
Right.
planning board would have to hold another public hearing.
I see what you're saying, but it would be sort of a group, you know, there'd be several issues for that public hearing of that nature. I would think
And
there'll be a catch-all public hearing on that kind of correction.
Oh, yeah, well, so that's a good question, Charlotte, because it's, so in part depend on how the town's going to present this to town meeting. Are you going to do an amendment to add solar here and do another amendment to do this and another amendment to do this little thing? Or you're going to have separate amendments for all your changes? That's something you don't need to answer now, but that will frame how you hold the public hearings.
Right.
So I have a quick question for you on that topic, which is that when the zoning board goes through those lists, are they to look at potentially approving or denying a special permit based on the fact that something is or is not so, situated for solar? I mean, I could see that we would want to promote solar, but I almost wonder, we typically, the bread and butter are the single family homes, and how that would particularly be applicable to the regular permitting that the zoning board does.
I think that sounds like a discussion for another
Yeah.
couple of meetings.
Yeah,
that's
I
a
don't know
long
that there's
discussion.
anything mandatory in that. It's just, I thought it was just one of the requirements to try to.
Because the zoning board typically looks at that list and they kind of run through it and they say, well, or the attorneys do, and they say, well, we're doing this, we're doing that, or the zoning board, when they grant a special permit, is saying, you're primarily in compliance with that section.
Right.
And now I just am unclear about how solar fits into that and whether that would be an issue with neighbors where they'd say, hey, we don't want your house tipped that way. I don't know.
I agree with Jed. I think it's a long discussion, the planning board, and maybe in a public hearing, because if you picture a standard development where all the houses face the street and their front facade is parallel with the street, it could be that's not south facing. So suddenly you wind up with a street of houses at a tilt to the street. If you're going to take solar sighting into consideration, I don't think we can answer that now. I think it would take quite a discussion, which we did not have at the time that we agreed to include it among the criteria. Was it mandatory or not? Or determinative, whatever word you want to use.
That's why I think it's not, Charlotte.
Yeah, I agree with you, Pat. I believe that was more of kind of a recommendation.
Yeah.
I don't want to, a nice to have, something that we wanted applicants to be more aware of and try to apply to their plans, but not necessarily a determining factor, I think was more of the language that we were using. But that can obviously be something that we discussed and maybe ultimately change. But Pat, I do think that was the language.
No, I agree. That was the spirit of the discussion at the time. But now that we might have to think up language, we ought to be clear on it. But that's where it would get added.
Yeah, I guess the reason why I ask is because it specifically says that the zoning board shall include consideration of each of the following. So if you add solar in there, which obviously you want to promote solar, But I guess the question is, does that push the applicant to have to potentially provide solar?
I would take it as if they have the ability to provide solar, then that they should. If there's reason and, good explanation why they're unable to, that's great. It also, as a
Now-
bargaining chip, if they are looking for leeway on other aspects of their permit and they can apply solar, maybe that's something that can be looked at beneficially.
Right now, the language shall consider is not shall include, it's shall consider. So
Correct.
it's very flexible now. The flexible language is there now. Maybe we don't need to
Just,
change that. We just
yeah,
need to add it to the list.
so just on what Noreen said, just with the current language, which shall consider. So if we saw an applicant, they would have to show that they actually considered that with every one of their projects, and then why they could or could not do it. And then we would get the arguments by the council on the hardship factors. So whatever your final wording is, just
Maybe-
give some
So-
thought to an applicant comes before zoning, for instance. This is what problems the zoning board may get into when they're trying to do the decision, because we rely highly on whatever the wording is that comes to us and whatever the referrals are.
Right.
And
So
no, very-
what if,
yeah.
what if the language was changed from shall to may, so that it's not requiring the board to make the person say whether they can do solar or not and why, but that if there's a particular circumstance where,
Okay,
is better, if you have the word may, it provides for more discretion.
could I just say that we're having the discussion now? The intention wasn't that we have the discussion now, but that we have it at some point in the future before the fall meeting.
Yeah.
And I can hear the environmental activists saying, no, they should consider it, so that there's an argument on both sides. Making it permissive might not be the way to go, but having the discussion now wasn't the intention. It was just to be sure that it's on our list for the fall. Because we can have the discussion, because we're ready to, on accessory dwelling units.
We can do that.
Right, so let's do it. Could I ask you a question, a procedural thing? Is it possible that we get one correct version and then ask you to be sure that it's in both areas, both residential and agricultural, instead of trying to separately correct two, as you've given to us?
I don't understand your question.
Well, what you've given to us to work on is to revise section 246B agricultural districts, and then subsequently residence districts use table. And I think that if we get one accurate version and make sure it's in both places, we will have accomplished it more easily.
I still don't understand your question. You have this document after the questions, after everything under C is exactly the language in the current bylaw.
Yeah,
So I was trying to present the language all together so you could see, particularly in the table of uses, what zoning categories home occupation is included and where it's allowed and where it's not
no,
allowed.
no, this isn't home occupation. I thought we were still on accessory dwelling.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right. Accessory dwelling. And you've given us to work from it, what appears in the new zoning bylaw under agricultural use and residence districts.
Right.
And they're very close to one another, but not identical. And you're attempting to make them identical. And I think that if we just look at one and ask you to be sure they're the same, we can do it quickly.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, you mean right now to go through these?
Yeah, right now. We could put this to rest today.
Well, as I said, the language that's in the track changes, either underlined or strikeout, adding that language and deleting the language would result in an accurate, up-to-date, correct version.
Right.
So what is it you want to go through?
I want everyone to agree that you're right and we can just adopt what you've said.
I'll make that motion.
For that easy.
Okay, is there anyone who disagrees?
So this is on the accessory, right? So under E, there's just a typo on where it says plus the following, there's just no T.
Where are you, Rob?
So under E, it says the last line says the exterior side of the first floor outside wall plus, and then it says
Oh,
he
plus
following.
the. Okay, you left that. Yep.
I did have a question on the outside wall, and I know that's not a suggestion, but it just says wall as in one wall. Does that have to be plural so you can actually figure out the square footage? It's just a comment. I mean, usually you take the,
That's existing language. I didn't change.
no,
any-
I know it is, and I'm just bringing it to attention. This is probably existing too, but where it mentions the third story of a colonial, which is 100% of the first floor. We have regulations that we deal with if there's a third floor, and the third floor is always a certain percentage of over the second floor. So that's something to think about. I don't think it actually is 100%. I know this is already in it, but again, under E, it says finished attic space. Attic space actually isn't habitable space in most cases. I don't know why we had originally mentioned attic space.
Oh, maybe thinking about unfinished attic versus.
Yeah, it's just attic is just a weird. It's a weird word to be putting in their attic versus just like a third floor. Under H, and this is just something that's come up in our own meetings. It talks about a property that has a pre-existing bedroom count that exceeds 4 bedrooms per 20,000 square feet can maintain. There's a weird thing we've come to know from the health department that they go by Title V definitions now. And if it was predating Title V, let's say it says that this was a 3-bedroom home, they actually do a count of the number of total rooms in the property and do a different quantitative measure so that a 2-bedroom home may actually allow a 5-bedroom home. It's something to be aware of. I was never aware of it before, but we've had 2 cases now where we actually have not gone by the bedrooms that are in the house. The health department has given us the calculation and said that it says 2, but we have to go by 5, or it says 3, we have to go by 4, and it has something to do with state regulations regarding to Title V and what they're allowed to use. That also can affect some of the other bedroom counts under I. I had a question why it was deleted under I, unless both the principal dwelling and accessory apartment are connected to the municipal sewer or to an on-site septic system with enhanced nitrogen removal. Why was that
Well,
removed?
it was revised, town meeting or planning board revised that to create its own separate category. So the language
Okay.
that was deleted in I is in J.
Okay. And again, under JI, I assume that where it says extent allowed, they know that that's just related to bedroom count. I assume extent allowed covers that because it's bedroom count. Where it mentions the on-site septic system with the enhanced nitrogen installed on the property, does that have to show that it would service both units? I know we're getting into situations with these accessory dwelling units where the health department's looking at saying they need their own system, they need their own water lines. That's referrals that we're constantly getting now. Under 4B, I think this is a typo. It says architecture as the primary resident. I think it's supposed to be resident CE.
Yes, very good. Great, thank you.
Under accessory apartments, the attached is fine. Under 5B, when it talks about a new detached accessory structure, does that have to say it's proposed?
I'm sorry, I missed it. I was trying to track.
Oh.
the change.
Oh,
What's
I'm
that?
sorry. Under
No,
under
it was
5,
my mistake.
oh, it's so under 5B, it talks about a detached accessory structure or within a new detached accessory structure.
Probably might help you.
Yeah, does that have to be proposed because it hasn't been approved?
Cleaning out some stuff and with water.
And it almost seems like that section should start, item B should start with the sentence, the third one down that says, in addition to site plan review, requirement above, an accessory apartment built an accessory, and then go to the rest of it. It seems like that should be the beginning of the sentence, because that's what section B only has to do with that.
But Bob, aren't the things that you're raising would be changes to
Right.
what was approved by town meeting at some point, whereas the intention of the underlining in the red now is to make it accurate to what's actually already been approved.
Yeah, so on some of this stuff that's in the red, so again, under I, just make sure that underline that's been approved that that covers that situation with health, that because they're the ones that are gonna have to use these for the
Right,
bedroom
but it
count.
either is or isn't what was approved.
Right.
But we're not changing the language this time.
Yeah, I'm just letting you know that what was approved under those two sections may not apply. So
Yeah,
you
we
could
might have to fix
tell
that.
that.
So I mean, I think if the work group wants to stick with, going to fall town meeting to just get this back to where it should be, then these suggestions Rob's are making, which raises a bunch of questions and makes some good points, probably go on to the phase 2.5 list. for
Right.
accessory apartments,
Right.
to deal with structural changes to this section, including moving it someplace else, but also changing the text. And then again, staff, big town hall staff is going to have to do some research with the Board of Health and others, probably engineer, I don't know.
But also, I was on this committee and I didn't catch any of these. In the reread now, I didn't think of any of these when we were dealing with it.
Right. And
So
Charlotte, in regard to what you were requesting that Bob do, there are different problems under both of these sections.
Right.
If you compare one to the other, so he can't just do
But
one.
he should. You'll recall, Pat, that when this was written and when it was changed, we didn't say we need different ones for agriculture and for residential. We were making one bylaw and it was appearing in two places. So
Right.
if they're not the same, there's a problem.
And that's why when you take it to town meeting, they have to be different to bring it back, because they are different right now, one to the other.
Yes.
To get it back
It'll be in
to
two pieces.
normal.
The two pieces will be identical.
Yeah,
They will be identical, but they'll be in, two separate places.
sure.
Right.
I don't want to cut off any conversation. I just want to be the time reminder. There is 10 minutes left in the agenda, in the proposed meeting time. So just wanted everyone to be aware of that, so it doesn't sneak up on
Aren't we going to 1:30?
No.
1
No,
o'clock,
not.
11:30 to 1 o'clock.
Oh,
Oh dear.
Yeah, proposed hour-and-a-half meeting. So that's why I just wanted everyone to be aware.
Okay, my misunderstanding.
Thanks for the reminder.
So at some point going forward with accessory apartments, I'd say Rob and Michaela in the work group should spend some time on that and, come up with your list of proposed changes for the phase 2.5
right.
changes in maybe spring 2023.
Mhm.
If we could move to the discussion paper on home occupation.
Right.
So just a little quick introduction. As we talked about at the last meeting, our attempt here is to give the work group a framework for you to conduct your discussions and decision-making regarding what to do about this topic. As Charlotte has noted, there's limited amount of money, so the work group's going to have more homework this time. And one of the homework is to tackle these more policy issue kind of questions on various topics, and starting with the home occupation. So I just tried to lay out for you, well, these are the issues that came up, these are the questions that came up. This is all the language that's in the bylaw right now on these two items. And then some suggestions. I will say the suggestions that are just mine were mostly formatting issues, not substantive policy issues. That if you're going to have two items, they really should be treated equally in terms of regulations, where they're located, how they're written, where they're structured. Because I think a lot of the confusion is, particularly with home-based service, is language for home-based service is all over the place. And the second confusion is that home occupation is in the table of uses, but home-based service is not. And that caused confusion. So I didn't tackle the policy questions. I was trying to tackle sort of thinking about how to actually address some of the confusion that's caused because of the way it's structured and written. And then some of the reviewers had specific language changes. Some of that's based on their confusion, so I'm not sure all of that's valid, but there you go.
So if this is the framework for the working group. And we have, what, 8 minutes? Maybe what we really need to do is set up a schedule for the working group to meet and give it time to meet twice in case they need it, in order to respond on these two areas, home occupation and home-based service business.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be beneficial to have a internal working group meeting to go over the discussion paper that Bob very nicely sent over to us, rather than try and have a discussion in 6 minutes.
Yeah.
I don't think we can do it. And Michaela,
think that's
I was asked to chair the meetings, but I feel like I'm taking over what you as our staff person probably are thinking about and doing, and that's the scheduling for this work group.
No, by all means, you're the chair and I'm here to help and support.
Oh, well, I don't know that I can schedule your time, but say that I could. If we have time, we want to meet before we next get together with Bob and Bob. Bob, with the work that you know you're going to need to do before our next meeting, would the next meeting be in a month? Would it be in 2 weeks? When do you think we'll be meeting next?
It won't be in 2 weeks for me because I'm going to be gone from, well, basically, I won't be available from April 27th until the week of May 9th. I won't be available at all. So, for me, it'll have to be a month.
I would like to propose maybe that the internal working group could get together in 2 weeks. I think that would give people ample time to review Bob's discussion paper, process the information, think about what they want to do, and get together and really have a substantive conversation regarding it. Obviously, I haven't checked with Jed, but that would be what I would recommend, is in 2 weeks, we get together to discuss that. And then we can work on the larger working group meeting in probably a month.
And is it good for us to always schedule on a Wednesday in the middle of the day?
Yeah, I think it makes sense to continue to have them on a Wednesday in the middle of the day to keep it, the same for residents if they want to
Well, it
stop.
works for me. Does it work for the rest of the working group? Is everybody other than Bob and Bob?
Yeah, yes.
So that would be okay? So it'd
So
be
that's
2 weeks from
Wednesday, the
now.
27th.
Yeah.
Okay.
And do you want to say at 11:30 as usual or at 11 or what? Because I know,
Yeah, we've done both.
yeah,
If we give ourselves 2 hours and our goal is to finish what we start, we're more likely to actually finish.
then
So
why
if
don't
we
we
start
start at 11?
Yeah, start at 11 and go to 1.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah, and really try to finish.
right.
Okay, so that's April 27th,
Mm-hmm,
27 at 11.
mm-hmm.
Great. And all of us are going to be feeding Michaela and Jed, and I assume Jed is going to give his to Michaela, the gaps that we see in the definitions. So
Right.
we have 2 things to do, and that's to see what we think about what we were given, the framework for the home-based and home services occupations, and gaps in definitions.
In addition to that, any sort of errors that you may know of or have seen.
Oh, right.
Don't worry, we're gonna send out homework assignments.
Okay. Thank you.
And then now would the full group get back together on the 11th? That would be about a month.
Oh, that's a Monday. No, I'm sorry. I would,
Or do you want to do the 18th?
I'd have to do it the 18th, because I'm not getting back until
right.
the 9th. I'm not going to be around until the 9th or 10th. So,
18 works for me.
The 18th?
Yep.
at 11,
Sure.
That's fine.
Yeah, this
Bob?
hour and a half is insufficient.
is 11, is that the 18th okay for you at 11?
That's all good.
Richie?
He's on mute. Oh, he's
Yeah,
got,
I was on mute. I'm sorry. I cannot do the 18th. I have a 10:30 doctor's appointment in Northampton. And I wouldn't get back here until 12:30.
But what we can always do is we can do the 25th of May, and maybe we can have another internal working group meeting
Okay.
and go over some other items. But that, that can be something that we can discuss on the April 27th meeting, depending on where we get. But we'll tentatively then put it for May 25th.
Mhm.
Could I just clarify the composition of the working group? Gary Street has been with us for this whole meeting, but has had his audio and video off. And Gary, I'm hoping that you're going to be part of the working group, that you will be there and joining in.
Yes, I plan on it.
Great, thank you.
So are there any conflicts on the 25th for anyone?
25th?
May
May.
25th.
May
not,
25th.
not as of today, but I'm sure we can all find one. A little bit of life always gets in the way, but at least it's a target, right?
Yeah,
Perfect. I will send out a tentative email so we can all kind of have it in our agendas for the future.
And would we go 11 to 1?
Yeah,
11 to 12:30, or what do we want to do?
11 to 1.
Okay, that's okay with me.
Great.
Bob?
That's fine.
I'm
that
wondering
gives
how
us
much of our
time, and if we get it
3,000
finished, we can leave earlier, but that gives us the 2
Yeah.
hours.
Okay.
So thank you all.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Enjoy your day.
Thanks, Bobs.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Moving forward.